one giant step for the old folks and one giant step for mankind. God, I made it. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Joyce's husband, Daniel, and welcome to the remembrance service for her. If you would stand and join me in a moment of reflection and silence about whatever you want to reflect about, I would appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you. Please be seated. As I said earlier, this is a remembrance service for Joyce Femia Nelson. First, on behalf of the family, I would like to thank all of you for your support over the years that she struggled with cancer. It meant a great deal to her in a very difficult period. The gathering today is styled as a remembrance, and so as Joyce's husband, I am going to exercise a point of personal privilege in telling you very briefly, just in case anyone wants to celebrate New Year's, about my years with Joyce and the time we were together from when we started dating. She was 15, I was 16, and we were older than Methuselah, we thought. And without error in our judgments, if we had any judgments in eastern North Carolina. This continued until October the 12th, 2021, when she died. This a little more than a year ago, during the period at which time you all were all so supportive with your remembrances and prayers and physical supports and the blankets that you would bring that she would use to try to get to sleep at night. But back to the story. I first saw Joyce on a Sunday evening at the Moorhead Dairy Queen. The Dairy Queen was about as big as this stage, and it had two service windows. She got out of a 59 Buick station wagon, and the car I was in was driven by a 15-year-old who had stolen it from his father and picked up a couple of first cousins and me, because I lived next door to the first cousin, and we had nowhere to go, so we went to the only place that was open in town, the Dairy Queen, to not be seen. But Joyce got out of the station wagon and walked up to the window, and I thought, dear God, this is the most beautiful human I've ever seen. And you know how, maybe you don't know, but in eastern North Carolina, again, we talk to ourselves, and particularly 15, 14-year-old boys. And I wondered out loud, who in the world is she? And it just so happened her across the street neighbor, Doug Willis, was one of the ones in the stolen car. And he said, that's Joyce Femia. She lives across the street from me. And her daddy owns Donnell's. I didn't care. Daddy could have owned Chase Manhattan for all I cared. And I thought, if I could get a date with her, it would be the most wonderful thing in the world. Well, she didn't rush over with the alacrity I'd hoped for to ask me for a date. So, fast forward a year and a half, 2 years, and I next see Joyce in Beaufort. Now, and Carteret County is divided in two areas. There's industrial lowlands like the Midlands in England, that's Moorhead, they had a factory. Beaufort does not have a factory, but could have benefited from having lithium added to the water instead of fluoride. But we had a good doctor, my cousin, Laurie Moore, and her mother had just had a child. That would be Michael. Michael, please raise your hand. Michael is not with us. He's here somewhere. Anyway, Michael's born. Joyce would hold Michael. She would come to Guthrie Jones drugstore, go upstairs. Her mother would take the baby for a well baby checkup. And I was a member of an elite paramilitary force called the Drugstore Cowboys. And my main job, here comes Michael. He was the one that was carried upstairs to Dr. Moore. And my job was to ensure that the parking meter didn't float away while Joyce Mama was upstairs. So I would lean on it and securely hold it to earth because of the anti-gravity in Beaufort. And I would also practice my spy-like flirtish glances out of the corner of my eye. And Joyce would be in the back seat reading, studying. And one day, she was sitting back there, and I noticed something that caused my heart to leap, and I became absolutely euphoric with hope. She was studying her book upside down, which, like all self-centered males, I took to meant she was eyeballing me. Well, she was still able to restrain herself. And after no small amount of plotting and scheming, and that is true, and trading, I was able to obtain her consent to date me. We were going on what was called a ride-around date. And in Carteret County in those days, that meant you picked up the young lady. She got in the car. She got in the ugliest car during a period of really ugly cars that Chrysler ever made. It was a gangrene Plymouth with bug eyes. But she went. It was a good sport that she was. And we rode around, and that Sunday afternoon was the most consequential ride of my life. I thought, the apparition I had seen for 2 or 3 years, only known by a name, is sitting here riding around with me. And I think I'm going to absolutely expire from excitement. So we started dating, and we dated in high school, we dated in college, and we dated under Joyce's conditions, which she made very, very clear, which was we are not going steady, and we are not exclusive. And let me explain what I mean by that. And this is where her teaching began. She said, if you ask another person out, as you take the initiative, I will be hurt and take it amiss. But if I am asked out, since I do not take the initiative, and just go for whatever reason satisfies me, you should not be amiss. And I said, there's something wrong with this, but I can't figure out what it is. And she said, you don't have to figure it out, just live by it. And so I entered into that period of heart of darkness where she could date other people and I couldn't. But it all worked out in the end. Finally, she consented to allow me to become her husband. She did not marry me. I married her, and I was damn lucky. The wedding took place a couple of weeks after I returned from my first tour in Vietnam on September 7th, 1968, and that was another fortunate day. Creedence Clearwater Revival, I think, had a song called Fortunate Son, and that's what I was that day. And for the next approximately 55 years, our relationship was best described by Joyce in question by one of my law school classmates when she said to him, when he inquired why in the world would she want to be married to me, he was apparently not one of my fans. She said, well, it has not always been pretty, but it's never been dull. And it never was dull. Joyce was a wonderful, genuine human being to me. If she put up with enough from her imperfect husband that if she had shaved the edges off of a serrated plastic knife and cut my throat, she couldn't have been convicted except for littering. What Joyce was to me, again, to quote from one of her favorite novelists, F. Scott Fitzgerald, she was the finest, loveliest, tenderest, and most beautiful person I have ever known. But even that is an understatement, close quote. I doubt in my lifetime that I will see her likes again. Thank you very much. My daughter, Angela Kayla Nelson, will now preside over the remainder of the day. Thank you for coming.
I'd like to echo my dad in welcoming all of you here today to honor the life of my mom, Joyce Nelson. It means a lot to see people here from so many different parts of her life, and having you all here is comforting, and it means a lot to us. So thank you so much for taking this time to be here. I'd like to introduce my brother, Chris Nelson, who's going to make some remarks. Chris?
We're going the opposite direction with this microphone. Hi, everyone. Welcome. So I went back and forth a lot on what I wanted to say about my mom. And it actually came to me as I was thinking about this ceremony and what everyone meant to her, because there's not a single person in this room she didn't care about and love and probably made feel like $1 million at one point or another in their life. And some people only got one interaction, some people got many. Most people got many because she was giving of her time. And it's an analogy I have shared with people before, and sometimes they have a hard time conceptualizing it, but today we are all an actual realization of this statement. Mom was a pebble, a rock, a boulder, whatever you want to call her, who entered into the water, this vast ocean, and ripples began, and they permeated out, and we are all her ripples. We are all physical manifestations. Some of us became tidal waves. Others of us just were happy to be floating along the water with her. And today, with everyone here to celebrate her, and even people who can't, who might be watching at home, I just want to thank you guys for being her decades of ripples, from her early friends to maybe only saw me as a fat little baby, all the way to her students, which even in the last year, she looked forward to getting up and seeing on Zoom every morning and helping them learn how to write and teach. And she always felt that helped keep her young. So I really just want to say thanks for being my mom's ripples and being here to show how big of a splash she made in the world. Thank you.
Back down. Well, much like Chris, I wasn't sure what I was going to talk about today with my mom, because how do you sum up the life of someone who's had so much influence on other people? And I started by going to her, what's the word I'm looking for? Master document, Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad. It is impossible to convey the life sensation of any one person's existence. That what makes its truth, its meaning, its subtle and permeating essence, it is impossible. And I mean, it is indeed impossible to sum up the life of this extraordinary woman, this woman who was to all of us something: a sister, a daughter, a friend, a wife, a mother, a teacher. And teacher was perhaps the greatest of all of the roles that she had in so many ways, because of the lasting impact she's made on this world. In her 44 years, which is a remarkable and also slightly confusing number of years to teach, she taught students in so many different areas, from AP to GED to working in prisons. And her impact was real, and it was vast, and it's very difficult to encapsulate. However, many of her students left comments about her when her death was announced last year, and I'd like to share some of those with you. And this print is really small, and I forgot my glasses, so I'm sorry. She made everything from the Canterbury Tales to Mrs. Dalloway feel accessible and immediate, and she didn't shy away from the darker and more difficult themes that we encountered in them. And they were not motifs, they were themes, and she made sure we knew the difference. I'll never forget having English with her. Taking her senior year English in 1999 sent me on a track to become a university professor in the UK, specializing in Shakespeare. She challenged me in a way that I hadn't experienced before, and it made me realize that literature is a discipline as well as a pleasure. I will forever be grateful to her. She really did change my life. Mrs. Nelson was so kind, and she cared about her students so much. She was just an absolutely wonderful teacher and a warm and thoughtful person. She was one of my hardest teachers, and I will always remember her for Heart of Darkness and her obsession with that. She was a fabulous teacher and made me a better writer for sure. We were so lucky to have her. Your mother was my senior English teacher in 1987. She was tough, and I learned so much about writing and great literature in her class. I remember going back to visit Enloe during my college years and thanking her for being such a great teacher. I remember telling her that I didn't truly appreciate her and her investments in her students until after I had left. And then this one, which was echoed by so many. She was one of my favorite teachers. The last sentence could be said, like I said, by so many people, but I was lucky to be one of them. I was the only one of my siblings to have my mom as a teacher, and it wasn't by choice. She taught the only AP class in my high school, and she would have been damned if her daughter was not going to get some AP credit for English. So I took her class. And I remember her saying to me when I was an adult that the things that frustrated her as a mother delighted her as a teacher. And as I thought about this, I felt the same way about her. The things that drove me nuts that she expected from me as a parent were things that I aspired to as a teacher. She had such high expectations and expected me to rise above all of the material and really learn it and understand it and make good choices. She had tenacity and a path for success. And those things that she did, the way that she was, made me a better writer and a better person in life. Mom impacted me not just as a parent, but as an educator, and I will forever be grateful for that opportunity. Let us learn to show true friendship to a man when he is alive and not after he is dead. F. Scott Fitzgerald, The Great Gatsby. So, I love Fitzgerald, but I don't think he's on the mark with this one. I think that you do need to show appreciation for people when they're alive, but I also think there's great value in gathering to talk about somebody after they've gone behind. I remember some of the great times that my mom and I had going to Democratic Party events, my kids' games and recitals. I remember even the times that we were in the hospital together, and she was so sick, but she was so brave, and we laughed and carried on and watched stupid movies and had a wonderful time with each other. She loved so many things. She loved shrimp burgers. She loved beach music. She loved Elvis. She loved the Property Brothers. If you didn't see the Property Brothers picture, make sure you watch the slideshow until you see it. It's fabulous. She loved to shag, the dancing kind, just FYI. She loved Kip Winger, which is going to surprise a lot of you, but she saw behind the music about him and thought he was fabulous. He writes poetry, for anyone who doesn't know, and she thought that was amazing. She loved the Hallmark Channel. She loved learning about new cultures and traveling. She loved to go to the movies and take a nap while she was there. I used to joke with her that it was ridiculous and silly to spend $10 on a nap, but as I age, I see the wisdom in her experience. Mom knew that her friends, family, students, colleagues, everybody in her life adored her. And like my dad, I want to thank you for showering her with love and tenderness while she was sick, particularly during her last days. I think of all of her students who were so fortunate to have her and benefit from her interpretation of literature and her kind classroom policies that encourage success. I've passed on so many of the things that my mom has told me about how she taught to my friends who were teachers, and they've implemented these things in a way that's helped their students achieve success as well. I, think of her in those classrooms, doing the things that she did, but also in relation to her coworkers, people who knew her as a mentor and a friend and a champion of students, particularly students who were experiencing issues of equity or marginalism, and her love of learning and knowledge. I think of her friends, both lifelong and new, who adored her as she adored them, and of all of us in her family, for whom every day is a day away from the last memory. I think of her and where she is. It is my belief that her day is filled with joyous reunions with loved ones like her father, who was lost to her when she was not even 30, her mother, her beloved aunts and uncles, her mother and sister-in-law, and other friends who have gone before, like Rosalina Rodriguez, Gary Gamble, and Tommy Phelps. She is at peace, and we can hope that the same for us who loved her and miss her will come in time. Although she has gone from our earthly sight, she is right here with us, and she's here in every life that she touched. Kindness to one person spreads to many, and the impact that she had is significant. It makes you wonder why we mourn, but we mourn because she's gone from our earthly sight, and there's a hole that cannot be filled by another. Yet we know that she lives on in us and in this world, and that is a cause for rejoicing. Nothing is right, and everything is right, and that is the paradox of grief. A single person is missing for you, and the whole world is empty. Joan Didion, The Year of Magical Thinking. One last word that I want to make is to speak a little bit about my mom's cause of death. I think many of you know that she passed from stage 4 colorectal cancer. And part of the reason that this happened is because Mom was scared to get a colonoscopy. She had some misconceptions about what it meant, as her fears were unfounded because the test risk is very low. And that's why her tumor wasn't found until it had already metastasized. Colorectal cancer treatment is often successful if the disease is caught in the early stages. I want to encourage all of you to not neglect your colon health. Please get regular colonoscopies. The U.S. Preventive Screening Task Force, which is part of the CDC, recommends that adults age 45 to 75 be screened for colorectal cancer. After age 75 up to age 85, that decision should be made on an individual basis between you and your doctor. People at an increased risk, a family history of colorectal cancer, should ask their doctor about when to begin screening and which test is right for them and how to get tested. If you want to be tested and you don't have anyone to take you or you're scared, please reach out to me. I'm on Facebook. You can find me, and I will be happy to go with you. I will be happy to take you whatever you need. The irony of all of this is that it's better than a movie nap, and Mom would probably have enjoyed it. So I just want to ask you all from the bottom of my heart to not neglect your colon health and make sure you get tested. Thank you. So I'm going to call now my aunts and uncles to the podium to speak. Anne?
I have a lot to follow here. Good afternoon to everyone again. Do you need something? Do you need to take? Okay. My name is Ann Deltato, and I am the second of the 5 Femia children. But the first to interrupt my sister Joyce's ideal world as the only child and the apple of everyone's eye. Bottom line is, I would teasingly remind her, I taught her to share. So I have thought a great deal, and for you English teachers, you noticed that I did not say a lot. I said a great deal about what I would say today. I laughed out loud when I wrote these words, since it was Joyce that I could have the best repartee of correct grammar and usage, and ultimately Joyce, whom I could call for the latest reference. Those old rules we both had learned from Spanish nuns as children had changed. But I digress. My sister Joyce was a force to be reckoned with. Okay, a force with whom to be reckoned. I'm keeping the grammar up. And would defend those she loved and respected with all her might, while at the same time taking those same folk to task in private moments. She was not perfect, and she was not always correct. And I have to stop here and say that I was also in that Buick station wagon, and I remember all of this, and I can tell you more stories afterwards, but anyway. It was not always easy for her to admit. Is it for any of us? But she loved to learn and made us all feel good with her curiosity about what we were sharing. She also was looking it up on the internet while we were speaking. I could hear her typing, and I'd say, Joyce, are you looking at it right now? And so by the end of the conversation, of course, she knew more than I did about whatever I was telling her. But that was her. But still, she was always interested in what we were saying and what we were doing. And that made each of us feel good, and yes, very, very special. And so to each of us, whatever you be, whether you be her children and her grandchildren, each of whom she adored and of whom she was so very proud, or her husband to whom she remained loyally steadfast and strong, her siblings and their family with whom she sorted out love and loss, laughter and tears, her friends who remained by one another's sides through so many years, her students from whom she demanded their best while giving them every chance, or her professional peers for whom she had the greatest respect and love, and whose support and generosity carried her the last 2 years of her life. Know that Joyce's spirit was that big. Each of us had our own unique place within her being, and for that, each one of us can always be grateful. I have a lot of pages, but it's not that much. In closing, we all know that Joyce was more of a Thomas Hardy and Joseph Conrad kind of girl. She liked to delve, and she loved the intricate wording that could convey a thought so profound. However, I came across a wonderful poem on Facebook that I saved. But guess what? It had subsequently disappeared and is no longer available. Have you gotten those on the things you've saved? And so I go to Emerson, someone so succinctly simple, but very true. And so I'm going to read, just very quickly. To laugh often and much, to win the respect of intelligent people and the affection of children, to earn the appreciation of honest critics and endure the betrayal of false friends, to appreciate beauty, to find the best in others, to leave the world a bit better, whether by a healthy child, a garden patch, or a redeemed social condition. To know even one life has breathed easier because you have lived. This is to have succeeded. And that, except for the garden patch, was my sister and my dear friend Joyce. Thank you.
I'm opening the floor to any other family members that would like to say something. Or honorary family.
So my name is Mike Femia, or Michael Femia. I'm the youngest of the 5 kids and the best looking, of course. So one of the things about Joyce is that she probably wasn't the most perfect person in the world, and if she got mad at you, you knew it because her nostrils would start to widen up. And she'd give you a glare. But when it came to things like wanting to teach and stuff, and taking care of her kids, she was incredibly passionate, which we all tend to get in my family at times. And a lot of people think that we're combative, but we really care. And what Joyce would do, so when I had made some changes in my work life and had seen how great and open technology was, I tried to get Joyce into it because a lot of the companies needed great trainers and teachers, and they would always get them from the teaching ranks. And she would just say, so what would I do? And I would say, well, it's just, you'd get a product or a type of process and thing, and you would teach this out. What the hell does that do? Well, I mean, you're sitting there helping build a business. You're going to get paid more, Joyce. Come on. And she said, but I'm not doing anything for the people in front of me. They're learning something that they can get from somebody else anyway. It was her passion for teaching that carried her through everything. And the other thing I will tell you is this. I remember when she was going through quasi-hard times at Enloe, I guess, different changes in leadership and things. And she didn't let it bother her. She just they demoted her, took her out of AP and some of the AP, but out of the leadership role. But she ended up back in it. And it was that passion for what she cared about, for molding and influencing. And I don't give a damn what they say about teachers these days. It's about their influencing and who's doing what at meetings. the people who influence us have always been teachers. The passion that teachers show and what she showed, because she would beat I'll never forget this one time when I first started really using the internet, and they had this thing, teacher.com or whatever, where they would go and do reviews on teachers. And I went on there, put Joyce's name there for the fun of it. And boy, this one kid had blistered her, big time. And that she was too tough and this and this. And then there was this real long list of kids that came in behind them for some reason or another and said, she taught me how to write so I could get through chemistry, so that people would understand me when I'm sitting here and talking to them about what I do, how I would be able to write it down. She influenced me by giving me a love for the literature. That's what passionate teachers do. If demand that teachers be allowed to teach, that's what I will say for her. Okay? Last thing I'm going to say is, I may be the youngest one, but I'm the colon cancer survivor. And I would like to echo my niece. And hell, I'll take you. Okay? So, thank you very much, and thank you.
Are there any other family members that would like to speak?
Hi, my name is Clara. I'm Mike's youngest daughter, and I'm also a bit of a crier, so buckle up. But I wanted to, so I'm my Aunt Joyce's niece, and I'm actually a lot closer in age to her grandchildren, so I felt a little bit more like I had an extra grandmother, which was pretty great. And I also went to Enloe. I wasn't her student, but I got some pretty special benefits of being both her niece and her student. So I just wanted to tell a couple quick stories about her that, also I had 2 cups of coffee this morning and 1 protein bar, so anyway, so there were just a couple quick stories that I wanted to tell about her, and just kind of, there's so much more that I would like to say about how much she meant to me. But I think these stories show pretty easily how, what she did for me. And then I think that that will be pretty well reflected in how you all feel about her too. I told you that I was a crier. So, thank you. If you touch me, it's gonna make me cry more, though. I appreciate it. Anyway, the first story I wanted to tell was when I got to Enloe. I think a lot of you will know that Enloe is a pretty competitive high school. Everybody knows exactly what they need to do to go to the most elite college. And I was like, look, I just want to go to a good college. I want to get it done. But I didn't know what to do. So thankfully, Aunt Joyce knew that I needed to do student council and join a club and play a sport and take 1,000 AP classes. So I got to freshman year. I was like, okay, I know she wants me to go to this student council interest meeting. I'll just go and see how it is. And then they told me that I had to record a speech to give to it still makes me nervous, to the entire school. It was 3,000 people. And I went to talk to her and I was like, look, I think that I'm just gonna wait till next year and get used to high school for a year. And I kind of thought that that was gonna be the end of the conversation, and it was not. And she was like, actually, no, you really need to do this. But when she said that, it didn't feel like she was dismissing my concerns or demanding that I do something I didn't want to do. It felt like she was telling me that she believed in me and she knew I could do more, and that she didn't want me to give up on this opportunity without at least trying. So I tried, and it worked out, and that very little but very terrifying election really paved the way for some confidence that got me through so many other things in my life and helped me to try more and more things. Just kind of knowing how much potential that she always believed that I had made that potential real and gave me a lot of opportunities to fulfill it. So the last year that my Aunt Joyce was alive, I was applying to nursing school. I was 4 years out of college where I had a journalism degree, and as we have all heard, she's, really into English. And I was getting worse and worse at it as I left school. And I had to write these essays, and she was sick, and I was like, I kind of told myself that she wouldn't want to be bothered with reading my essays because she had too much to deal with. But really, I was just really embarrassed by what I'd written. And I didn't want her to see it and tell me how bad it was. So I called her a couple months before she died, and I think she was a little bit sicker than I really realized that she was, probably a lot sicker. And I just called her to chat, and she asked me immediately how my application went. And I was like, oh, no, it's fine, we don't have to talk about it. And then she kept asking, and I was like, okay, these are the prompts, I'm really having trouble with these essays. And as sick as she was, we spent an hour talking through the prompts and the essays and the stories that I could tell that would be true to who I was, but also help me stand out. So I just want to make sure I don't miss anything really profound that I wrote. I think just the biggest point of that story is that she truly never stopped supporting me. She never stopped wanting me to reach further and further than I thought I was capable of, even as she got sicker and sicker. So about a week after she died, I found out I got into nursing school, and a couple days later, I found a book of poems that she'd given me several years before for Christmas, and in the front was a little note. Just telling me how excited she was for my future and how much she loved me. So I think, like I said earlier, my relationship with my Aunt Joyce and what she meant to me was much, much more than her help on my college applications. But I just think these stories just really clearly show how much she never let me give up on myself or sell myself short, and that she demanded, very lovingly, that I take risks and dream a little bit bigger, and she showed me how to do that. So I think I felt like the very best way to honor her memory would be to keep trying new things, to find happiness. I think that's what she wants for all of her friends and family and loved ones. And then, of course, to pay forward all the support that she gave us. So that's it. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Elizabeth. I am the second-born daughter, and I was not planning to speak, partially for this reason. I'm just so gratified to see everyone here today and so appreciative for your presence. I know she would be as well. There are many stories that all of us have to tell, but I think the thing that I really want to speak to in this moment that's been implicit in what a lot of people have shared is that my mom was about making more justice in the world. And I just want to mark that because we may not think as much about English teachers being a site of justice making and world building, But that is precisely what she did, and she did it in and out of the classroom. But some of my first memories are her telling me that when she and my dad were teaching GED classes in the brig, in prisons, that there should be no such place, that no one belonged in a jail, and the worst thing you could do to someone is to isolate them from community. And that the least you can do is to create freedom in people's minds. And that the only difference between what side of I remember this really explicitly, the only difference between what side of the bars you're on is education, support, and resources. And that there are plenty enough of those to go around. She absolutely believed that every single living person has a potential for excellence. And it did not have to be English, but if you ended up in the class, it would be. All right, but one of the things she also offered to people was a refuge for things that were unavailable other places. And she offered them someone to speak with, both compassionately but also really critically. She could see a bigger picture. She could help people think through what are the steps to make my life livable when it does not feel livable now. Her commitment to educational equity and to ensuring everyone had a chance to find out what they were capable of is really unprecedented. And I teach now, and I'm a professor in college, and people want to make that something different than a high school teacher, but it is actually much easier, and it is less important than what happens in our K through 12 classrooms, because that is where kids who may or may not have another adult in their lives that they can turn to and who can see them as the amazing person that they are because of the gifts that they have, and who will see what is possible for them, not simply beyond their deficits, but because there were no deficits, only, gifts and opportunities. And I'm not sure how many folks you all have come across like that in your life, but I haven't come across a lot of them. And I can really remember stories, not right in this exact moment, but so many stories of times where someone else might have perceived that it was too much or a burden, and it was just what she did every day, making sure that every kid, there was, an inversely proportional relationship that I continue to carry forward to this day. The more you struggled to be present in whatever setting she was in, the more she was going to reach out to you and make sure that you had what you needed, right? Do you need to sleep in class today because of where your life is? That's learning too, right? Do you need to make sure that you have the clothes for whatever possibility you didn't know you would get? That's learning too. Do you have a friend to turn to in a time when you need them? That's learning too, right? Is somebody bringing you some lunch during the day when it's technically not food time? That's learning too. Do you have a hat on? Who cares, right? These were the kinds of things that really shaped her teaching, but also her life and the way she interacted in the world. And there was I don't think you will ever have met anyone as intellectually curious and as committed to understanding and knowing more and finding space and being able to see. And in a historical moment where it is really hard to look at a group of folks and see where their connections are, she had the ability to do it. She could really do that, and she could hold space for a tremendous number of perspectives while also guiding folks to the more ethical, to the more just, to the more caring, to the more thoughtful. And that's a tremendous gift. And it is a loss. I also went to Enloe. I was not in her class, but I know how many people that she impacted. I see a dear friend in the back right now. I see other folks who I know share that experience too. And it was a really special place. I tell you what, if you missed out on Enloe in the 80s, you missed out. I'm going to say that. What a time. But that was her family too. That was her community. So any of you who have come here from there, I just want you to know that you are not forgotten when the last bell rang. sometimes, mostly because she was there until 7, 8, 9 o'clock at night anyway, right? But you mattered, and you continue to matter. And anyone who thinks, well, she doesn't remember me, I promise you that she does. And that even now, she cares about you being your best and brightest self, and is glad to have had any part in helping you get there. Thanks.
And next is going to be DJ Femia, my mom's youngest sister. The baby girl.
Thank you all so much for coming today. Joyce is here with us. We know that, and she wouldn't miss it for the world. But as I listened to my brother-in-law, sister, brother, nieces, nephew speak, I thought I'd go at the very, very end, but I determined that perhaps now was the time to do it. And Sister Ann and I were talking one day about Joyce and our relationship with Joyce, and she said, well, you know, we each within the siblings had a different relationship with her, and that was true. And she said, well, she was more like a mother to you. And I said, well, in some ways she was. She was 9 years younger than I, and in some ways she really, really was. But I wanted to find a quote that kind of encompassed what Ann and I were speaking about, and speaking about how each unique relationship that she had with each of us, but all of you too that are here today, and the folks who could not come and are watching on live stream. And it was ironic to me who I found this from, but it was the third quote that I saw. And it was, we never know which lives we influence, or when, or why. It was Stephen King. And that is true for Joyce. She influenced me in a lot of ways. She was my biggest cheerleader. She was obviously my big sister. All of my siblings, I was very, very fortunate. All of my siblings, including my younger brother Mike, included me in their lives. I learned to dance. I learned to bop. We called it the bop, not the shag, until we went to Carolina. We called it the bop when I was 7 years old, because Joyce and Ann would let me come in the living room when they had friends over, and they would play the 45s that we got from Donnell's. So I just wanted to put a very briefly thing on it. Another thing I did want to say is when I was a freshman and sophomore at UNC, Daniel was in law school, first and second year law school. And my friends, some are here today, and it's so wonderful, thank you guys for coming. And they said they've known Angela and Elizabeth since they were 3 and a year old. And they said, well, Joyce was everybody's big sister. All of my friends say she was our big sister too. But I had this last description, which all of you have already said, and that is daughter, sister, wife, mother, grandmother, and teacher. She loved teaching. I would say to her, please, Joyce, stop. You're tired. You're going through chemo. You're going through radiation. You're doing this. It's COVID. You're online. And she said, this is what keeps me alive. The students keep me alive. So she kept going. But to end where I began, Joyce influenced all of our lives. Only we know when, and we will continue to learn why. Thank you very much for coming.
So Mom had 2 grandchildren, and they are my children, Lauren and Ryan. And Lauren couldn't be here today because she's moving next weekend, and we all know what fresh hell that is. But Ryan would like to come up and say a few words about his grandmother, or his Nana, as he called her.
I was recently reading a short story by Ted Chiang, an author I highly recommend anyone in the room read, and it dawned on me that I was never going to be able to share with my grandma the joys that I'm now able to have thanks to the tools she gave me early on in my life. I consider myself an intimate product of all my family members around me, provided the gifts of rhetoric from my mom's side and semantic law from my dad's. And without any of these gifts, I wouldn't even have the linguistic capacity to conceptualize myself in this room before you today. And even as I speak now with the exact semantics of the word I'm using, the very rhetoric in my voice, I think how my Nana lives on and the very critiques she would give me afterwards. And I think that is the most amazing part about Nana. I remember in her last days, I was assigned and happily was able to help her when she was in the hospital room while my mom was with my sister. And I thought deeply upon how we were all just bound by these bodies in our flesh, and how as we have, whether it be mental illness, disabilities, illness, the very spirit of ourselves is trapped within it. But now, just seeing the people within this room today, I think on how Nana was never bound because she was always having someone else to talk to, someone else to put her spirit into, just like the very mosaic behind me, a new color for every single person within this room. I can guarantee you, anytime I read a book, her name will come into my mind. She will never be dead in my thoughts. And at the end of the day, I know as I go on to my next set of kids or someday grandchildren, I too will give them English textbooks so they have something amazing to read. Thank you.
Okay, anybody else? Marge? Coming up to the podium now is Marge Foreman, my mom's dear friend and NCAE extraordinaire, who I just want to say a moment. I want to take a moment to just talk about how much Marge helped my mom while she was sick, trying to figure out state retirement and state Medicaid and all the things that she had to deal with at the end of her life. Marge was an absolute beacon of hope and love through all of that. We love you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. It's truly an honor to be here, and I've listened to all of what the family members have said, and starting with Daniel's great remarks and his great sense of humor. I met Joyce over 30 years ago when my oldest son began his tenure at Enloe High School. And then Joyce and I worked together in the PTA. I remember we had an international festival because Joyce was a person of the universe. And we were trying to, there were some incidents that happened at school, and we were trying to celebrate diversity and honor and respect everybody's talents and gifts that they had. And it was a thriving success. But Joyce gave me a lot of personal support. As all of you said, Joyce made everybody feel special. And one of the things that I always think about when I think about her and the journey that we had together as dear friends, cherished friends, that grew into a loving sisterhood. And at the end of her life and last months and so, when she and I would talk, and when I would text her, because sometimes I'd text rather than calling, I would end by saying, I love you dearly, your sister, Marge. And when she would say, I love you dearly, your sister, Joyce. So we truly were sisters from another mother and another mister. But you couldn't help but love Joyce. I mean, Joyce, to me, was one of those special people that God put on this earth that touched so many, many lives. And to me, she was a gift from God on this earth to so many of her students, to so many of you, and especially she was that way. She was that to me. I'll share just a couple stories. Someone, I don't know who mentioned the fact of her always caring about, I know she taught AP, and very, very smart, one of the smartest people that I knew. She was beautiful, as Daniel said, but it was just her inner beauty that made that outer beauty just shine so bright and so brilliantly. But she shared with me, she said, Marge, she said, she was the head of the English department. She said, I could teach AP classes all day. Some of the brightest students here. Enloe was a gifted and talented magnet, International Baccalaureate High School, rated very top in the whole nation. She said, but I didn't want to do that. She said, I wanted to teach the basic English classes. She said, because those were the students who needed me. And that's where she thrived. And I think it was maybe Elizabeth, or one of the family members mentioned her, caring. To me, I refer to Joyce as a drum major for justice. She truly lived a lot of what Dr. Martin Luther King lived and preached and practiced, and she lived it. And I remember one student in particular was in a basic English class. I don't know, we were having a conversation, and she shared this. There are students who come to Enloe. We have the gifted and talented magnet kids, a lot of kids who live in the big urban communities who come in because of the excellent academic environment there at Enloe. But Enloe was basically inner city Raleigh school, and when they did the integration, they integrated the schools, and so the base school and the base students came from a lot of the housing projects that were around Enloe. And then, of course, my children and a lot of you and Angela, we didn't come from that environment. But Joyce wanted to reach those students, and she shared an instance with me. It was a young man who had come, from a lesser environment. What he had been exposed to, children, they learn what they live. And so she said, in class, they were having a discussion, and somebody may have said something or some way offended him. And so he used a few French words, as I call them, but profanity. And so she, didn't scold him in front of his classmates, but afterwards, she pulled him aside and she said, I don't allow profanity in my classroom. And she said, there's a lot of words in the English language that you could use to express how you feel when people offend you and so forth. And so she said, can you think of another word or words that you could have used to let that person know how you felt or how they offended you? And so the young man thought for a moment, and then he came back and he, told her another way he could have said it. And so she said, thank you. And so, during the time in the class, as time went on, she said he was pretty conscientious about not using profanity. But I think something happened one day and he had slipped and said something. He said, I'm sorry, Miss Nelson. And so she said, thank you. And so from then on, it never happened again. He went on. And one of the things that Joyce did with these students who in the basic classes, they were usually a grade level or maybe 2 grade levels below in their English. But during that course of that semester, year that they were with her, those students thrived. And when the time that they ended that year, they could move on to their next grade level and be on core with their English. Many of them graduated, and over the course of the years she shared with me, they came back. Some of them went on to the military, they went to community colleges, earned a trade, and many of them went on to college and beyond and became very, very successful. Another story that Joyce shared was, this was when I was in the PTA. She came in, a young lady from a modest background. Her grandfather was rearing her. She lived in one of the housing projects around Enloe. She was very gifted and talented with her voice, and UNC Greensboro had offered her the opportunity to come and audition for a scholarship. So Joyce said, she needs a ball gown. She presented this to the PTA. I was the president at the time. She said, and is it any way you all could help finance getting her a ball gown so that she feels confident and really good about herself and can do a good job this audition? And of course we responded. The young lady went on, she did the audition, she got a full scholarship, graduated, and eventually was off Broadway in New York City. But those were just the things that Joyce championed, the least of these. She did a lot for kids who were gifted and talented and the AP and IB, but she didn't forget those, as she said, who needed me the most. And then just on a personal note, 2007, I lost my youngest son who had graduated from Enloe. And Joyce just had a knack for knowing when you needed her. And as I said, over the years, we grew real close. And sometimes when I was struggling through a day, and it seemed like it was out of the blue, but I know God uses people. And Joyce would call me, and not she didn't go on about my son and my loss, but she would just start saying things. Margie, you're so good, and Margie, you have helped me a lot in understanding this when she would come to my retirement workshops, she and Daniel. But it would help me and got me through the day. And as I said, God uses people, and he used Joyce Nelson mightily for so many, especially those that were the least of these. And she helped me during that first year in particular with my struggles and my loss and helped me through it. She would call and say, let's go to dinner, let's do this. I mean, she just was an amazing woman. And as I shared, I did do retirement workshops for NCAE, Angela mentioned, and Joyce would come, and for the last 10 years, Joyce would come just about every year. And she said, I'm gonna retire this year. And Daniel would be with her most of the time. And then she'd come up afterwards, tell me what a great job she would do. And she said, I think I'm gonna but of course she didn't. In March of 2020, she called and she said, Marge, I think I'm gonna retire. Can I come and talk to you? I said, sure, Joyce. I said, man, she's finally gonna retire. And Daniel was with her. Went to the conference room, and that's when she shared the news of her illness. But she didn't want to talk to me about her illness, what she was going to have to face, what she was going to go through. She wanted to talk to me about, help me to make sure I understand that I get this right, go through these options again with me, because she was concerned about her beloved Daniel, her children, and making sure that if she didn't fight the illness, that they would be taken care of through her retirement. And that's just a remarkable woman that she was and still is in each of our lives. I could go on and on and on about Joyce, and I'm gonna stop. But I would like to share a poem to me that sums up the legacy of her life. And the poem is called A Parent's Wish. And it says, for my children, I ask. But I'm gonna take a little bit of personal liberty and temporarily change that title to say Joyce's wish for all of us. It says, for my children, I ask, for my beloved Daniel and my children and all my family and friends, that you seek your happiness not so much at the finish line as in the running. That you have the strength not to lift tremendous weights, but lift one fallen friend. That you learn to fight your own battles with a never-ending string of temporary ceasefires. Not that the occasion makes you smile, but that your smile makes the occasion. And that your bridges be built not over rivers, but build those bridges over misunderstandings. And that your wealth not be in banks, but in your heart. And that you gain power not over others, but over your own selves. And that you don't bow down to little people with big titles, but to big people with little titles. And that your names be household words not throughout the land, but in your own households. And finally, that your monuments be found not in public places, but found in the lives of the hearts you touch. Joyce left a living legacy and monuments in each of us. Let's honor her, that when we leave this earth, that the monuments that we leave will be in the hearts of those we touched. I thank God for the blessing that she's been to me personally. And I know she's been a tremendous blessing to thousands of students and to each and every one of you. And thank you for allowing me to share a few comments about her great life.
I'd like to welcome my friend, Felice Gray Kemp. She and I graduated high school together, and Mom was instrumental in her life, and she'll tell you more about that.
So every time I have the opportunity and privilege to learn or hear about I will never call her Joyce Femia Nelson. I will never be old enough or disrespectful enough. She will always be Miss Nelson to me, and she will always be family. I learned something new about her. Today, it was contextualized for me that she was a fighter for social justice, and apparently a heck of a fundraiser, which I thought was a privilege extended only into me, but I'm glad that was not so. So I was a student of hers. I can say unequivocally she was my favorite teacher other than my mother. And I had the privilege of learning from her with Angela, not in Enloe, the vaunted, wonderful Enloe, but New Bern Senior High School. Go Bears, everyone who's watching. I spoke with Ms. Nelson when Angela called me a week before she lost speech and said, "It's time." And she put her on the phone, and we talked. And again, you're so busy living your life sometimes that you need recorders and historians to read back to you how you were living when you were so busy surviving. Well, Ms. Nelson came into my life at an inflection point that I think about at least once a week. And much like I will never call her Joyce, the word feels odd in my mouth, she would always call me Felice Gray. And it always make me kind of just stand up a little bit taller. Well, Felice Gray then, now I'm Felice Gray Kemp. Felice Gray, at age 10, decided that she wanted to be a lawyer. At age 12, she decided that she wanted to go to Yale. Felice has always been very specific. Felice Gray was always very specific in her goals. I don't like talking about myself, but it's important for me to do so in order to show her light in my life. And I had no idea how that was going to happen. I guess what we would call back then visioned or manifested this world that was larger than the segregated town in which I grew up, armored with the love and confidence that my family gave me, and needing every bit of that armor to go out into a world that told me as a black woman, even my relatives, that I had a better chance of seeing God than ever being a lawyer. Well, Ms. Nelson never believed that for an instant. And when I shared with her my vision, she told me, and I do not remember this, I used to walk the campus with a notebook, and I would be so deep in my thoughts, and she'd say, "Felice Gray, what are we writing today?" And I was a campus leader. I was popular and had friends across all cliques, even before inclusivity was a thing, but I did live a lot in my head because I came to New Bern, North Carolina, after having lived in places that afforded a person like me a vision larger than I could have lived there at the time, and I'd never given up on that hope. And so I told Ms. Nelson I was writing down the classes that I'd be taking at Yale. And she was like, "As one does." And it's just a conversation. And I grew up single parent family of divorce, and there was no plan. There's no one other than me that for 200 odd years at that point had ever gone to Yale. In fact, with the help of Ms. Nelson through the story I'll next tell you, Yale was a foreign concept. It's like, why wouldn't I go to Duke? Why wouldn't I go to Chapel Hill? Great schools. I did get into Chapel Hill. And one of my underclassmates asked me, "Felice, why you're so smart, would you go to school to learn how to make locks?" And I was like, what is she talking about? And I went to the gym one time. I was like, oh, vocational school. And that's fine, because I take an ASVAB, and I'm supposed to either be a factory worker, a psychiatrist, or an attorney. So I chose column C. I chose column C. Ms. Nelson is the reason, a large part of the reason, God's grace being first and foremost, that column C was an option for me. When I was in her class, she said that I received a scholarship to, you see the fundraising story coming in, a scholarship to a school called Exeter, which is a feeder school to many Ivy Leagues. I couldn't spell Exeter or spotted with all but the 2 letters. And she said, "You got this scholarship, you're going?" And I was like, great. I still believe to this day, though she'll never admit it, fundraising was happening. That $1,200 could have been $12 million for my family at that time, but somehow I got not only to Exeter for the summer, but I also got spending money because she shared that she'd put up something in the cafeteria, could you help Felice do this? So I'd gone to Exeter, which her not long after me sharing with her that I was writing in my notebook about my classes was a precursor to an Ivy League experience. And I was actually offered an opportunity to stay, but my brother, 9 years younger, I'm like junior mom to him, so he was not having it, so I did not go. I came back all the more committed that I was going to go to Yale. I had asked the teacher to do my review. Ms. Nelson, fortuitously being in the teacher's lounge that day, saw me the next day and said, "Felice Gray, I need to speak with you." I was like, "Yes, ma'am, Ms. Nelson, what did I do?" She said, "You do not want that teacher to write that review." I said, "I do not want that teacher to write that review." She said, "I will write that review. And while you're at it, you might want to look at another guidance counselor writing that review." I said, "Oh, that guidance counselor will not write that review." So Ms. Nelson on 2 occasions was part of my path to Yale, where not only the fulfillment of my 12-year-old dream was realized, but where I met my late husband, who passed just a few months before Ms. Nelson met Glory. And from that young man, Evan James Kemp, became the fulfillment of a dream I never knew I had. Oh, he just said seriously. Yes, sir, seriously. Okay, sorry, not your moment. David spoke about the ripple. There are no more profound and apt words to describe the life of Miss Nelson. I think of it as butterfly effect. But for her, but for the ripples that she caused, I would not be standing here as the award-winning lawyer. I would not be standing here as the chastised parent of a miracle child, the widow of 32 years relationship of the one and only man I have loved so far. I know that they are together. I feel them in this room. Ms. Nelson is a miracle that will live on in us and those of us who tell her story and who are grateful. I was the first one she sent to Yale, but not the last. There are 2 others who don't want to be bothered with an old woman from New Bern High School, and they're off doing their own thing in New Haven. But she will be eternity because we will live her example. I teach as an adjunct professor because of Ms. Nelson. I give my time, my resources, my funds. I am a gubernatorial appointee to higher education in the state of Connecticut because Ms. Nelson lives in my DNA. And I will not, uncharacteristically, as both a Southern Baptist and an attorney, take many more of these words and of your time other than to say thank you to the Nelson family and friend circle. We know who we are. We know what she meant to us. Her heart may have stopped, but her legacy continues. But for that day, I was blessed to become her student. I don't know where those butterfly wings would have taken me, but thank God they took me where they did. I love you, Ms. Nelson, and I hope to see you in about 80 years.
A few people reached out to me before the service and said they might like to make remarks. I don't want to call on anybody, but if there's anyone else who'd like to speak, this is the time. I'd like to introduce George Adams. I don't even know how to sum up what George meant to my mom, so I'm going to let him do it.
Good to see you. All right, so let me begin by saying that physicians usually don't follow lawyers. So we're at the other end of the spectrum here. But regardless, I think regardless of who we are, Miss Nelson touched whoever she taught. And let me, and there's going to be some people who, one of my idols, when he was on his deathbed speaking at the ESPYs, he won the 1983 national championship at NC State, said that to live to adequately live, you need three things, right? You need to laugh every day, right? I think everybody's heard that Miss Nelson laughed every day. And I'm going to reminisce a little bit. So we all have different experiences with Miss Nelson. One of the things that tickles me, so my 11th grade year, right? Me and a friend of mine, John Cook, who was a good friend, a group of us, we're talking how hard we had worked at Enloe. And we're coming up on our senior year, getting ready to go to college. We needed a break, Why are we taking all these AP courses? So we decided that instead of taking AP English, that we would take regular English, right? It'd be refreshing. We get a break, get to go play golf, have a good time, right? Well, I got in this class with John Cook, and wanted to talk about very unconventional teaching. Not to say it wasn't good, it's just it was different and so forth. I still remember going home to my mom going, Mom, I think I made a mistake, And I was supposed to be in Mrs. Nelson's English class. And unbeknownst to me, of course, my mom, very similar to Miss Nelson, had their way. I think my mother contacted Miss Nelson, and I was in probably a week in this class, and I still remember being in this trailer, and I don't remember what we were learning about. I remember the teacher being on the table yelling at us, and I hear this tapping at the door, and it was Miss Nelson. It was the last period of the day, and I'm like, oh my goodness. And so the teacher gets off the table, walks out, and next thing I know, they were asking, George, can you come talk to us? And I said, sure, I'll come. And next thing I know, I was walking with Miss Nelson back to AP English. And I still remember that walking back. She was asking me, George, what were you thinking? Obviously, I was not thinking. And God knows, she saved me. But that started a relationship between me and Miss Nelson that I wouldn't be standing here today telling you about. But going back to laughing every day, I went through NC State, I went through East Carolina, I went to Dallas, came back to Duke, ended up at Chapel Hill. You surround yourself with like-minded individuals. And I can honestly say, your experience that you just talked about, yeah, I'm a professor. Yes, I'm a teacher. Yes, I keep pushing the buck. Yes, I work hard, right? Yeah, I put 100 hours in a week. She understood because she's the same-minded person, much like the other people in this room that experience Miss Nelson are. And it's just the right thing to do. You put other people before yourself. But we had a bunch of really good laughs, which made it special. So remember, you got to laugh every day. Let's talk about the second thing, because there's three of them, and I won't, there's people who, when you put them on the podium, like my friend just a second ago, you give her the mic, she ain't going to give it back to you. Other people just give it right back to you. Well, I'm sort of like her, but I won't stay up here too long. But so going to the second thing, the other thing was that you needed to experience emotion that brought yourself to tears. Think about that. You need to cry every day. Let me tell you, me and Miss Nelson, oh my God, if there's one thing about Miss Nelson, even she was like someone I respected as my mother. Granted, I probably would tell Miss Nelson some things I wouldn't tell my mother, but regardless. But there are things that I experienced with her. My mother being diagnosed with cancer a week before I went to medical school, telling her I was thinking about getting ready to drop out. And she talked me out of it. Divorce, kids. All of those themes that, a lot of us have challenges with that you cry about. Well, I had that opportunity to have a vent with Miss Nelson, and it was personal. So I can honestly say that she laughed with me every day, and she cried with me a lot of times. The last thing is to bring yourself to profound thought about something. So imagine that, right? We all get in our regular routines every day. It's simple. It's easy. I'm an interventional cardiologist. Man, I could cath you every day long. I don't even need to think about it. I know exactly what I'm doing. I know what I got to do. But imagine thinking about something totally different and having a conversation intellectually about that. And do that every day, right? I remember talking to Miss Nelson about things like 9/11. I remember talking to her about, so that one of the things is when I grew up, I raised cows. I lived on a tobacco farm. We raised cows. We did a bunch of different things. Let me tell you something. Maybe she did know about raising animals and all these other different things, but I don't think she did. But let me tell you, when I talked to her about it, or when she asked me questions, she was the only one in the room, and she was so enthralled with everything I had to say about raising a cow or raising horses. And she'd always say, you know what, George, maybe you could pick me up in your truck and we just go out and see the cows. Man, if you really want to go see the cows, I'll take you to see the cows. You know, but I mean, she made me feel special. But the point of it is that we could talk just about anything. I mean, it could be things political, it could be things religious, it could be talking about cows. I mean, but it were those things that just made it special. But I just wanted to leave this with you. So just remember that if you live your life every day where you laugh, you cry, and you bring yourself to a profound thought, to think about something special and to discuss it every day, man, I think you've lived life. And I think that's what Miss Nelson did for me as well. Thank you.
Would anybody else like to say a word? This is Cobble Staley. You'll see her in Mom and Dad's wedding picture in a lovely fetching peach gown.
How many years ago?
Not very many.
I'm Cobble Staley, and Joyce was my dear, dear friend. Please excuse my voice. I'm not about to cry. I've got allergies terribly this time of year. I met Joyce. I was only 17 years old. Joyce was actually 18, a couple months older than I was. We met at UNC at Greensboro our freshman year in college. To say that we clicked is a total understatement, as did my friendship with her then roommate, Frances Hyman, now Richardson. She's sitting out there. It just was a special time. I just want to share a couple of very quick funnies. I feel absolutely irreverent speaking this after these beautiful tributes to Joyce's prowess as a teacher, which are so well deserved. But there was another side of Joyce. There was a side of Joyce, our 18-year-old selves, I need to share with you. She was a fun and crazy girl. To click, that we clicked was a total understatement. We clicked so well, we ended up heading right down the road to summer school. Instead of studying at night like we should have been doing, Frances was the studious one. She'd be all ensconced in her bed with her books and papers all spread out. Joyce would come to my room. She said, "Come on, we got to go disturb her." So we would burst through the door, rush to the stereo, cut on the Temptations. We had our empty, tall glass Coke bottles. You used to have those back then. Turn them upside down. Put the small end in your hand that kind of looks like a microphone. We would start singing and dancing to the Temptations. We had it down pat. We would go through several songs, Frances just sitting there like the Sphinx, staring at us. And we were always thinking up some kind of prank. Fran locked us out of her room one night so she could study. Well, we lived in North Spencer at UNCG, which was the oldest dorm there. It had ceilings about as high as this chapel in here, and the doors were almost that tall. They had the old-timey transoms that opened over the top. So we said, it was open too. We didn't have to worry about opening it. It was open inward toward the room. And Joyce says, we got to throw something over that transom. And I said, well, what? So we're thinking on this, and a crowd is gathering in the hall of other friends. I'm afraid Joyce and I had a reputation by now. And somebody suggested neat hair removal lotion. So we got a chair, desk chair from one of the rooms, and a trash can that was about this tall, plastic from another. Put it on top of the chair, and Joyce is going to climb up there. She had to climb onto the wooden part of the chair, then up onto the plastic thing, which is about this tall. She could barely reach, and she kept saying, "Don't let go, don't let go." I'm standing there holding the chair and one hand on the trash can. Passed up the knee, she reaches over and pours it down the side of that transom. Well, we heard screeching. And when we heard the screeching, we took off. I let go of the chair and the thing. The trash can went this way, the chair went the other. We took off running. All the people gathered took off running. I think she had to spend several nights in my room. She was locked out for several days. Between these pranks and general misbehaving, we found summer school a necessity. We, of course, roomed together, and the party continued. We spent a lot of time on the campus beach, but somehow we both managed to get A's and couldn't understand why we had such a hard time when we were going through the first time. Well, as you know, summer school's a bit easier. Well, I talked Joyce into, let's knock out a PE course also. I wanted to get my lifeguarding badge. I said, Joyce, let's take this lifeguarding badge and get rid of this PE course. And she said, oh, okay. She never told me she was not a strong swimmer. I didn't know that till we got in the class. Oh, Lord. She swore the teacher was trying to kill her, that she was going to just die from this. We laughed about this so long before, even right up until, I'd say, a month or two before she passed away. I could go on about these funny times. That was the side of Joyce. Funny, always looking for a prank or something to laugh about. From the double dating, planning our weekends at Chapel Hill, during the summer, her dad letting us spread onion rings in the back of Donnell's so we could look out the window at the boys that were parked out there. He didn't pay us. He compensated us by letting us eat all the food we wanted. Until that day arrived, he came to us and said, "You're eating up all my profits. Get lost. Go to the beach." These were really the happy, carefree times of being young. Our lives continued to mirror each other. I was married on August 24th, 1968. Joyce and Daniel 2 weeks later. We were in each other's weddings. We had our first child 1 year later. Still, we kept up with each other. As fate would have it, both families eventually ended up back in Raleigh. Still, we kept tabs. In later years, we would become faithful phone buddies, sharing several hours of long telephone talks. I was retired, but as you know, Joyce was not about to leave her teaching. So she didn't have a lot of spare time. That left us to phone calls. During these talks, we solved all the political problems of the world, all the global issues, bashed presidents. We just had wonderful, wonderful talks. Always the laughter. Then here comes COVID, and that prevented anything more than phone talks. Except once, we just had to see each other. It was in the summer, hot as Hades. We came to your driveway, parked the car. Daniel had put up the garage door. Joyce sat way in the back because she was already fighting at that time, and we didn't want to take any chance about spreading anything to her. Believe me, every drop of sweat was worth it to spend that time with them. We sat there again and rehashed this stuff that I'm telling you now, and we laughed just like we'd never talked about it before. Joyce and I shared some very intense conversations during her last few years, and especially so during the last few months. As difficult as this was, I hope the laughter and the joy that we brought to each other just diminished some of the darkness. I know I will never get over missing her in my life. It has left a huge hole, as I'm sure it has in all of you all. This picture right down here, the black and white, Daniel brought me a copy of that last Christmas. I framed it, put it in my den, and it's where I walk by it just numerous times during the day. And I swear sometimes her eyes are following me and twinkling at me. So when it does, I go, "Hey, Joyce." This vibrant, sparkling girl will always, always be my forever friend. I care so deeply for Joyce's entire family, the Nelsons, the Femias. I've known these Femias since they were little children. I just know that she's the brilliant woman that she was. She's left an indelible mark on this world and on every student she ever taught. I'd like to leave you with this poem. Everybody else did poems. I should have known that. But this is not one of Joyce's favorites by any means that I know of. It's one of my favorites that I want read when my time comes. It was presumably written by the Reverend Luther Beecher, who passed away in 1903. It's also known as the Parable of Immortality, or Gone from My Sight. It's known that way, I think. Also, Henry Van Dyke claimed this in some of his writings, but I think the Reverend actually authored it. I'm standing upon the seashore. A single ship at my side spreads her white sails to the morning breeze and starts for the blue ocean. She is an object of beauty and strength, and I stand and watch until at last she hangs like a speck of white cloud, just where the sea and sky come down to mingle with the other. Then someone at my side says, "There she goes." Gone where? Gone from my sight, that's all. She's just as large in mast and hull and spar as she was when she left my side, and just as able to bear her load of living freight to the place of destination. Her diminished size is in me. Bear with me a moment. Her diminished size is in me, not her. And just in the moment when someone at my side says, "There she goes," there are other eyes watching her coming and other voices ready to take up the glad shout, "Here she comes."
Is there anyone else who'd like to make remarks? Okay. With that said, I want to again thank all of you for coming to the memorial service for my mom, Joyce Femia Nelson. It's obvious from the speakers and the people here today that she touched so many lives, and we were very joyful and very grateful to have all of you here with us, whether you're here in person, here virtually. We're very thankful. Go out today and improve someone's life in her honor. Thank you.